The piercing sound of gunshots echoed through the streets, and in a split second, a life was shattered. But what if the person you accidentally hurt was someone you never knew existed? In this emotional tale, Vito Romano, a powerful mafia boss, finds himself face to face with the consequences of his violent world. When a stray bullet strikes an innocent child, a little girl he later discovers is his own daughter. Stay tuned as Vito struggles to make things right, navigating the chaos of his past and the undeniable bond with his child. Will he survive his mistakes, or will the weight of his guilt drag him under? Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with us until the end for the shocking twist that'll leave you questioning everything. The piercing sound of gunfire shattered the silence of the bustling city streets. In an instant, the quiet evening turned into chaos, as the air was filled with the stench of danger and the unmistakable crackle of conflict. Vito Romano, the infamous mafia boss, stood frozen in shock. His men were scattered, firing back at their rivals in a desperate attempt to regain control, but Vito's mind was on one thing: the little girl. It happened so fast. One moment she was there, an innocent bystander playing with her friends on the street. The next, she was crumpled in a heap on the pavement, blood spilling from her tiny body. The sound of Sophia's scream echoed in his mind, even as the gunfire continued around him. He didn't know if she was still alive. "Vito, we need to move," Marco, his right-hand man, shouted, pulling him back from his daze. Vito didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the little girl, the one whose life he had just shattered. She had been nothing more than a child, playing with the other kids, no older than 8. And yet, in a matter of seconds, she had become a victim of his own empire's violent existence. "Vito," Marco's voice was sharp, urgent. He grabbed Vito by the shoulder, shaking him. "We have to go, this is bad." Vito blinked. His world was spinning, the weight of the mistake pressing down on him. He hadn't meant to hurt her. It was just a mistake, one that shouldn't have happened. He had been caught in the middle of a power struggle between rival factions, a deal that had gone wrong, and in the chaos, the innocent child had become collateral damage. "We're not leaving her like this, Marco." His voice was cold, but underneath, it quivered with an emotion Vito rarely allowed himself to feel: guilt. Marco hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "We can't fix this, Vito. The girl's gone." Vito's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. "Not yet, find her." His command was firm, unwavering. He couldn't let this go, not without knowing that the little girl, who had never done anything to deserve this fate, was okay. Marco nodded, running toward the crowd of panicked bystanders. But Vito stayed frozen, staring at the spot where the girl had fallen. Her little body, lifeless on the cold concrete, was an image that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In the midst of the chaotic gunfire, Vito couldn't bring himself to leave the girl behind. His heart hammered in his chest as he darted forward, ignoring the shouts of his men and the crackling violence around him. With desperation flooding his veins, he reached the fallen child. Blood soaked through her clothes, pooling around her tiny frame as she lay motionless on the cold, unforgiving pavement. Vito's hand trembled as he gently lifted her, cradling her in his arms. His gaze was fixed on her face, her innocent face, now pale and drained of life. He couldn't comprehend what had just happened. The gunfight had been intense, but he hadn't expected this. He hadn't intended for her to be a casualty of his war. He just needed to get her out of here, if she could still wake up, if there was even the slightest chance. But before he could take another step, pain exploded in his arm. A bullet tore through the fabric of his coat and into his flesh, the searing agony forcing him to stumble. His grip tightened around the girl, unwilling to let her go, but the pain in his arm nearly took his breath away. The sound of gunfire didn't cease. It was relentless. His men continued firing, but the overwhelming chaos made it impossible for them to regroup. In his arms, the girl's tiny body felt lifeless, her head rolling back as her limp form shifted. But Vito didn't stop moving. He staggered through the chaos, blood soaking his sleeve, each step making the wound in his arm burn with sharp intensity. Another shot rang out. This time it grazed his side, tearing through his jacket and drawing more blood. He gritted his teeth, refusing to drop the girl, his sole focus on saving her, despite the overwhelming urge to collapse from the pain. His own body was failing him, but the girl needed him. He could feel the weight of the situation crushing down on him. The sounds of his men shouting, the screech of tires, the rapid gunfire, all became distant as he fought to hold onto consciousness. But the blood loss from his injuries was too much. "Vito?" Marco's voice came in a shout, a mixture of panic and urgency. Vito didn't turn to see if his men were catching up. He couldn't. His vision blurred, the edges of his sight becoming fuzzy and dark. Every breath felt like a battle. And then, as if in slow motion, Vito saw a figure emerge through the haze of gun smoke. His rival, Raul, the leader of the rival gang, emerged from behind a broken car door, his eyes locked onto Vito. The two men, bound by years of animosity, now stood face to face in the middle of a battlefield. There was no room for negotiation, no more time for games. Raul raised his gun, his eyes cold with intent. Vito's breath hitched. His body wasn't responding the way it used to. He felt the weight of his own mortality creeping in. The gunfire erupted once more, Raul's bullet piercing through the air. Vito tried to duck, tried to shield the girl, but he was too slow. The bullet hit him in the chest, sending a jolt of pain through his body. The girl's fragile form trembled in his arms as Vito stumbled back, his legs buckling beneath him. He could hear Marco shouting, the chaos escalating around him, but everything felt muffled. The world slowed to a crawl, the cold pavement rising to meet him. And then another bullet. The world went dark. Vito's vision returned in flashes. He could hear muffled voices, but they were distant, distorted. There was a dull throb of pain in his chest, his arm, his side. He tried to move, but his body didn't respond. It was as if his limbs had betrayed him. "He's alive," Marco's frantic voice pierced through the haze. The voice was followed by the sound of hurried footsteps and the distinct roar of an engine starting. Vito felt hands lifting him, steadying him as his body was placed carefully in a vehicle. His vision was blurry, but he saw his men, their faces grim, their eyes filled with worry. "We have to get out of here. The cops are on their way." It was Marco again, his voice sharp and commanding. Vito felt himself being lifted, but it was almost as if he wasn't fully in control of his own body. His vision was clouding over once more. "Get him to the hospital. Hurry." Marco's words were strained, but Vito could hear the urgency in his voice. He wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on, but one thing was certain: he wouldn't let this end like this. As the car sped through the dark streets, sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder with every passing second. Vito knew they were running out of time. But through the fog of blood, loss, and pain, Vito couldn't stop thinking about the girl. She had been caught in the middle of his world, a world that was violent and unforgiving. He hadn't meant for this to happen. He never wanted her to be a part of his empire's wreckage. As he drifted in and out of consciousness, he found himself praying, not for his own life but for hers. The car screeched to a halt. Vito was quickly lifted out and rushed into the emergency room. The doctors worked frantically to save him, but he could feel himself slipping. His pulse was weak, the world blurring at the edges. The hospital was chaotic, and Vito's men were doing their best to cover up their tracks. The police were on their way, but there was nothing they could do. The blood loss was severe. The doctors were doing everything they could, but it felt like Vito was already halfway gone. Yet through the haze of the situation, one thing became clear. He had made a fatal mistake, and there was no way to take it back. His world was falling apart around him, and there was no escape from the consequences. His eyes flickered open again. He saw Marco standing by the door, his face drawn with worry. "You're going to be okay, Vito. You have to be." Vito tried to speak, but his lips wouldn't move. Instead, he just closed his eyes again, sinking deeper into the darkness. Outside, the city continued to roar, but for Vito, everything had stopped. His empire, his life, his choices, it all felt like it was slipping away with every passing second. And as he lay there, fighting for breath, the final question echoed in his mind. Had he made a mistake that he couldn't undo? Vito's heart was still heavy with the weight of his actions, but his body, battered and broken from the gunfire, was finally beginning to heal. The cold, sterile air of the hospital, the beeping of machines, and the sharp scent of antiseptic were now his constant companions. Every breath was a struggle, and every movement felt like an effort. His body ached from the damage the bullets had caused, but the physical pain seemed nothing compared to the weight of what had happened. The girl, Sophia, the child he had inadvertently hurt. The doctors had given a grim report. She was breathing, yes, but she was unconscious, lying in a coma. There was no certainty of when or if she would wake. That thought lingered in the back of Vito's mind as he stared at the blank hospital wall, his gaze unfocused, his mind swirling. 3 days passed. Vito had been awake for some time now. His wounds were still fresh, but he could feel his strength returning bit by bit. His hand gripped the edge of the hospital bed as he took another sip of water. Marco entered the room, his face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "How are you feeling, boss?" Marco asked, trying to gauge his condition. His tone was careful, as if not wanting to upset Vito. Vito's voice was hoarse, but his words were steady. "I'll survive, but the girl," he trailed off, the pain in his chest flaring up again. He didn't need to say more. Marco already knew. Just as Marco began to respond, the door to the room opened. A woman walked in, her face filled with distress. She was young, with striking features and a look of raw vulnerability in her eyes. She rushed toward Vito's bed, but before she could reach him, one of the gang members who had been posted outside the room stepped forward. "Ma'am, you can't go in there." The man's voice was firm but not cruel. The woman, her breath shallow, started to cry. She sobbed uncontrollably, her hands pressed to her face in disbelief. "Where is she? Where is my daughter?" Her voice cracked with desperation, the kind of raw grief that only a mother could know. Vito watched from the bed, his heart sinking as the woman's cries filled the room. Marco glanced at Vito briefly before stepping toward the woman, his voice calm and steady as he spoke to her. "Your daughter is in the next room. She's alive. She's breathing, but she's in a coma." Marco spoke gently, but there was an underlying tension in his voice. He wanted to shield the woman from the worst of the truth. The woman's eyes widened, her face paling. She collapsed into Marco's arms, her sobs louder now, shaking her entire frame. "A coma? No, no, please, not my baby, please. I need to see her. I have to see my daughter." The gang members stepped forward, their hands gently holding her back, trying to console her without telling her the full truth. "Ma'am, we can't let you in right now. It's not safe. But she's alive. She's strong." They lied. They didn't have the heart to tell her that her daughter might never wake up, that the child she had fought to protect was caught in the chaos that Vito had caused. Vito lay back in the bed, feeling an ache in his chest that had nothing to do with the physical wounds. The woman's cries echoed in his mind, and the guilt gnawed at him. He had been the cause of this, the one who had brought this pain into her life. He had ruined everything. The next few days passed in a blur. Vito was moved to a more private room, his injuries slowly healing under the watchful eyes of doctors. His mind, however, was consumed with thoughts of Sophia. His thoughts constantly drifted back to the little girl, to the pain in her mother's eyes. But there was something else gnawing at him, something he couldn't ignore. Maria, Sophia's mother, had requested to see him. Marco brought the news to him one evening. "She wants to see you, Vito, the woman, the one who's been crying for her daughter." Marco hesitated. "She says she needs to talk to you. She has something important to say." Vito stared at him, his mind still clouded. "Why?" he asked, his voice low. "I don't know, but she's been asking about you for days. She said she wants to speak to the man who rescued her daughter." Vito nodded slowly. His heart was pounding in his chest, a strange tension building in him. What was she going to say? What did she want from him? He could only imagine how she must feel, standing there at the precipice of her daughter's life, knowing that the person responsible for it was lying in the bed in front of her. A few minutes later, Maria walked into his room. The moment she stepped inside, everything seemed to freeze. Vito's breath caught in his throat. He had seen her face before. Years ago. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, but the years had not been kind to her. The pain in her eyes, the deep sorrow that lingered behind her gaze, was unmistakable. She stood there for a long moment, her gaze locked onto Vito, and neither of them moved. Vito's mind raced, his heart hammering in his chest. This woman, the one standing before him, was the same woman from his past, Maria. Her voice, when it came, was strained. "I never thought I would see you again." Vito swallowed hard. "I never wanted to be seen, Maria." His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. She stepped forward, her steps shaky but determined. "You left me, Vito. You left me with no explanation, no way to contact you, and then I found out I was pregnant with your child." She inhaled sharply, fighting back tears. "You left me with nothing. No money, no help. I was all alone, trying to raise our daughter in a poor neighborhood, never knowing where you were." Vito closed his eyes, the weight of the past crashing down on him. It had been 9 years. 9 years since he had walked away from her, from everything they had shared. It was the kind of thing he had buried deep in his mind, something he never wanted to think about again. But now, standing here, facing Maria again, it all came rushing back. Maria continued, her voice trembling. You don't even know what I went through trying to raise her on my own. I had no idea how to tell you, how to find you. And then I found out she was yours. I found out you had a daughter." The silence between them felt like it stretched on forever, the weight of their shared past hanging thick in the air. Vito couldn't speak. He didn't know what to say. All the words that he had once had, the excuses, the justifications, were gone. There was nothing left but the truth, and it was a truth that he could no longer escape. Maria's eyes, filled with unshed tears, softened. "I came here to tell you that I have a daughter, and I need you to know. But now I see you, Vito. I see you as the man who caused all this pain. The man who shot my daughter, the man who left me to suffer." Vito opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. His mind was spinning, and the guilt, the weight of his past mistakes, was suffocating. Maria stepped back, her breath ragged. "You don't get to hide anymore. You don't get to run away from your past. You have a daughter, Vito. She needs you. She deserves more than what you've given her." With that, Maria turned and walked out of the room, leaving Vito in the silence of his own guilt. He could hear her sobbing as she left, her cries echoing down the corridor. Vito remained still, staring at the empty doorway. His heart pounded in his chest, the weight of his mistakes pressing down on him like a boulder. A daughter. The words repeated in his mind, over and over again. He had a daughter. And in that moment, Vito Romano knew that his life, his world, had irrevocably changed. The weight of the realization hit Vito like a freight train. His pulse raced, his breath became shallow, and his vision blurred once more. The words Maria had spoken rang in his ears. "You have a daughter, Vito." But it was the connection between those words and the little girl he had unknowingly shot that was now breaking him. Vito's heart thudded painfully in his chest. It wasn't just that he had hurt an innocent child. It was that this child, Sophia, was his. She was his daughter, a part of him that he had never known existed, a part of him he had abandoned long ago. The guilt and regret overwhelmed him. The gravity of the situation crushed down on him, far more than any physical injury ever could. Before he could even comprehend the full depth of his realization, his body betrayed him. The shock, The weight of everything that had unfolded in the past few days was too much for him to bear. His vision faded, and the world went black once again. The last thing he felt before he lost consciousness was the burning pain in his chest, mingled with the excruciating sting of remorse. Maria stood outside Vito's hospital room, her face pale, her hands shaking as she clutched her phone. The words she had just spoken to him echoed in her mind. She had hoped that seeing him again, facing him after all these years, would bring some closure. But now, everything had spiraled out of control. Her heart raced as she frantically dialed the number for the doctor. She had barely been able to register what had happened when she saw the way Vito collapsed, his body limp, his eyes glazed over, his breath shallow. "Doctor, please come quickly." Maria's voice broke through the phone, panicked and frantic. "Something's wrong. He's not responding." She didn't wait for the response. As the phone call ended, she rushed back into the room, her steps echoing down the sterile corridor. Vito was lying in the bed, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths, but his eyes were closed, his body still. Maria's heart dropped. She felt like the world was slipping from beneath her feet. Her thoughts were consumed with Sofia, her daughter, the child that Vito had shot. She couldn't even begin to process what had just transpired between her and Vito. It was too much. Her mind was a blur, but there was one thing she knew for certain. She couldn't lose Vito, not like this. Not after everything. In the adjoining room, Sofia's fragile body lay still, but the steady beeping of her heart monitor indicated signs of life. It was the only thing Maria had clung to in the past few days, the hope that her daughter would wake up. Hours after Vito lost consciousness, Maria had found herself at Sofia's bedside, her hands clutching her daughter's cold fingers. The doctor had told her that the worst was over, that Sofia's condition had stabilized. She was breathing on her own. The coma was a result of the shock, but there was still a chance that she would recover. But Vito was a different story. The doctor entered the room where Maria sat by Sofia's side. His face was solemn, but there was a certain empathy in his eyes. Maria stood up, wiping the tears from her face as she quickly turned to face him. "Doctor," her voice cracked, her eyes pleading for answers. "We're doing everything we can for him, Maria." The doctor spoke gently, as if he were breaking bad news in the most compassionate way possible. "Vito's condition is critical. He suffered a great deal of shock, both physically and emotionally. It's hard to say how long he'll remain unconscious. The heart, it's fragile after such a trauma. His body is fighting to survive." Maria's breath hitched in her throat. She couldn't bear hearing the uncertainty in the doctor's voice. She turned back to the bed, her gaze falling on Vito's still form. He's not going to wake up, is he?" Maria whispered, more to herself than to the doctor. Her hands trembled as she reached for her daughter's hand again. Clutching it tightly, the doctor hesitated, looking at the ground before meeting her eyes. "It's too soon to say, Maria. It's possible that the shock of everything, the shooting, the revelation about his daughter, it may have been too much for his heart. He's not out of the woods yet." Maria felt the world begin to collapse around her once more. She had tried so hard to protect her daughter, to protect herself. But now, here she was, standing on the precipice of losing everything. Her past with Vito, the man who had walked out on her when she was pregnant, had come rushing back. She had lived through years of hardship, trying to raise Sofia alone, never once knowing what had happened to him, and now fate had thrown them together again. And yet, she could feel the weight of the past pressing down on her. The unfinished business between them, the resentment, the unanswered questions, none of it was easy to navigate. But then she thought of her daughter, Sofia. She was still here. The doctor had said she was breathing. She had survived the coma, and that was a miracle in itself. But what about Vito? Would he survive this, could he? Maria couldn't stop the tears now. Her entire body shook as she sat down beside Sofia, holding her daughter's hand, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She had hoped for some kind of closure, but this was more than she could handle. Vito's body felt like it was being torn apart by the weight of his regrets. In the darkness behind his closed eyelids, he fought to wake up, to return to reality, but it was like swimming through thick, heavy water. The world around him was distant, muffled, out of reach. Every time he tried to move, to speak, he found himself slipping further away. The pain was still there, a constant reminder of the destruction he had caused. The shooting, the child, the woman who had once been everything to him, Maria. It all came crashing down on him, the guilt, the realization, the truth of what he had done. His daughter, Sophia, was in a coma. He had hurt her, and worse, he had abandoned her mother, leaving her to struggle on her own. He had never known about her, never realized the consequences of his own actions, and now the weight of it all threatened to suffocate him. But amidst the darkness, he could feel the faintest spark of consciousness. His body was weak, broken, but his mind was fighting to stay awake. He had to know. He had to see Maria again. He had to know if his daughter was okay. Days turned into a blur for Maria. The doctor had given her the same news over and over. Sophia was stable, but it was still uncertain how long it would take for her to recover fully. Meanwhile, Vito remained unconscious, his condition still critical. Maria spent the days sitting at their sides, the quiet hum of the hospital machines her only companion. Then one morning the silence was broken. Vito's eyes fluttered open. His vision was blurry at first, but as his senses returned, he could feel the weight of the situation. Maria was standing there, her eyes red from the endless nights of worry. She had been waiting for him to wake up. Vito, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it, filled with disbelief and something else, maybe relief, maybe sorrow. He could barely speak. His throat felt dry, but he managed to rasp out, "Sophia." Maria nodded, tears falling from her eyes. "She's alive, Vito. She's alive, and she's fighting." Vito's heart lurched, but then the memory hit him with full force. The shock, the revelation, his daughter, his responsibility. He couldn't ignore the weight of it any longer. His eyes locked onto Maria, the woman he had walked away from, the woman who had survived on her own for years. He had hurt her. He had hurt them both. And now he could only hope it wasn't too late to make things right. "I'm sorry, Maria, I'm so sorry." His voice was shaky, filled with regret. But Maria didn't respond. She just sat there staring at him, her tears a mixture of pain and relief. And for the first time in years, Vito allowed himself to feel the depth of what he had lost. 2 weeks had passed since the chaos. The long, drawn-out days in the hospital had been filled with uncertainty, pain, and fleeting moments of hope. But now, the silence of the hospital was replaced with the hum of life returning. Vito Romano and Sophia, his daughter, were finally well enough to be discharged. Their wounds had healed, and their spirits, though scarred, were beginning to recover. Maria, too, felt the burden lifting from her shoulders, though not completely. The weight of their past still lingered, but it was lighter now, tempered by the miracle of survival and the possibility of a future they hadn't expected. The moment they walked into the modest home that had been the backdrop of Maria's solitary life with Sophia, Vito was struck by the warmth of it. The small house, though cramped and humble, had always been full of life. Sophia's laughter, Maria's nurturing presence, and the memories they had built. Now, it seemed like the walls held even more significance. The place where he had been absent for so long was now the place he would try to build the future he had denied them. Vito looked around, his eyes lingering on the worn furniture, the kitchen table where countless meals had been prepared, the photo frames lined up on the wall. He had never seen this home as more than a place to sleep after his exploits in the underworld. But now, it felt like a sanctuary. Maria entered the house first, and Vito hesitated for a moment at the door. His pulse quickened as the reality of being there with them, really with them, hit him. Sophia had just stepped inside, her small hand grasping Maria's, a smile on her face that was faint but genuine. The bruises from the accident had faded, but the weariness from everything she had been through was still in her eyes. "Home sweet home," Maria said softly, turning to Sophia and giving her a reassuring smile. But then her gaze shifted to Vito. For a split second, the air between them seemed to freeze. Maria hadn't expected him to be here, in this home, after everything that had happened. After all the years apart. She still couldn't quite reconcile the man who had once walked out on her with the one who had just saved her daughter's life. But seeing him here now, with his injuries healed and his demeanor somber, Maria couldn't help but feel the weight of their shared past. Sophia stepped forward, her small voice breaking the silence. "Daddy," she said it quietly, unsure if it was okay to call him that after everything. Her eyes were still filled with uncertainty, but there was something else in them now, curiosity. Vito's heart tightened as he saw the young girl before him. His daughter. The child he never knew he had until everything had crumbled around him. The truth of her existence, the deep connection he had ignored for so long, was now undeniable. But there was a chasm between them, a distance he could never have foreseen, one that came with the years he had missed. "Sophia," Vito's voice cracked, the weight of his own emotions making it hard for him to speak. The word daddy felt foreign, unnatural to him. He had never been the father he should have been. He had never been the man he should have been. But now, standing here in the doorway, facing his daughter for the first time, he realized that he couldn't let the past define their future. They would find a way to make this work. They had to. Sophia's expression softened and she took a hesitant step forward, her small hand reaching out toward him. Vito stood frozen for a moment, unsure of how to react. But then something inside him clicked, a longing, a desire to connect, to be the father she deserved. Slowly he knelt down in front of her. I'm sorry I wasn't there before. I'm sorry I missed so much of your life, but I'm here now, I'm here." His voice trembled, raw with emotion. Sophia looked at him, her eyes wide as though she wasn't quite sure what to make of his words. But then a faint smile crossed her face, a smile that had been missing for too long. "I know," she whispered softly. Maria stood in the background, her eyes welling with unshed tears. She had seen the damage that had been done, the heartbreak and betrayal. But now, in this quiet moment, she saw something new, hope. Hope that her daughter and Vito could build something together. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible, and that was enough for her. As Vito wrapped his arms around Sophia, holding her gently but firmly, a wave of warmth filled the room. It wasn't the loud, boisterous celebration he had once imagined would accompany a homecoming. There were no grand gestures or sweeping speeches. There was just a quiet, profound moment of connection, father and daughter, reunited at last. Later that evening, as they all sat around the small dinner table, Maria served them a simple meal, nothing fancy, but everything felt different. The room was filled with an air of peace that had been missing for years. Vito, still recovering physically, ate slowly, but he didn't feel the hunger for power or control that once consumed him. Instead, he felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. "This is good," Vito said, breaking the silence. Maria gave a small laugh. "It's just spaghetti." "It's not spaghetti, Maria," Vito said, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "It's everything this. Being here with you both, it feels like home." Maria nodded but didn't respond right away. She was still processing everything. The man who had walked out on her, the man who had brought so much pain into their lives, was now sitting at her table trying to be something different, something better. Sophia smiled, her voice gentle. "We're a family now, right?" Vito's heart clenched at her simple question. He hadn't known how to answer before, but now he did. "Yeah, we are." He smiled at her, his heart swelling with something he couldn't name. Love. Days passed, weeks, and slowly Vito began to rebuild what had been broken. The past could never be erased. The choices he had made, leaving Maria, abandoning Sophia, those would forever be scars on his soul. But as he spent time with Sophia, as he tried to make up for lost years, he felt something in himself shift. He began to understand the meaning of family, of responsibility, of love. These were things he had never valued before. One afternoon, as they played a board game together in the living room, Maria watched them, Vito and Sofia, laughing, joking, connecting in ways she had once feared would never happen. The bond between father and daughter, though fragile, was growing stronger every day. Vito turned to Maria, his expression earnest. "I'm sorry for everything, for leaving, for not being there." His voice was low but firm, as though he needed her to understand, truly understand. Maria looked at him, her gaze softening. "I know, Vito," she paused, taking a deep breath, "and I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're trying." For the first time in years, Vito felt a sense of peace settle over him. The chaos that had once defined his life, the violence, the power struggles, the betrayals, had all led him here. And somehow, even through all the pain and destruction, he had found something worth fighting for. As the days turned into weeks, Vito, Maria, and Sofia grew closer. They didn't have everything figured out, but they had each other. And for the first time, Vito understood what it meant to be truly alive, to love and be loved in return. The lesson they had all learned through the chaos of their lives was simple but profound. Even in the darkest moments, when it seems like everything is lost, life can surprise you. You can still find redemption. You can still build something beautiful from the wreckage. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can receive is a second chance. And so, as the family settled into their new life, the past faded into the distance, replaced by the quiet promise of a future they would now face together. The end.